Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Meyer, and I am the interim dean at the Matejka College of Business here at Cleveland State University. I'm also a professor of accounting, and I'm happy to welcome you to our October 2022 Cornerstone Speaker Series today. Our topic today is evaluating ESG, environmental, social, and governmental risks. Serving as our moderator is Dr. Ben Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman is an assistant professor in the accounting department here at Cleveland State University and studies auditing functions, including ESG. We very much appreciate Dr. Hoffman serving as our moderator, and I will now turn it over to him to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. And as Heidi mentioned, my name is Ben Hoffman. I'm excited to be the moderator today for our panel, and really excited about the panelists that we have here today. So I'll give a brief introduction, and you'll get to hear about all the exciting insights they have about ESG and what's happening in ESG today. First, we have Kristina Beifus. Kristina is the Senior Manager of Global Compliance and Sustainability at American Greetings. She works internationally to execute American Greetings' sustainability program and has a wealth of experience in global regulatory compliance and risk mitigation. Next, we have Jack Matejka. Jack recently retired from Eaton as the Senior Vice President of Internal Audit there. He was the Chief Audit Executive for the company and is a Cleveland State MBA alum. Jack has also served the Cleveland State Foundation as chair of the audit committee for several years, and he's also on our accounting advisory board for the accounting department at CSU as well. Last, we have Bill Vogelgsang. Bill is the co-founder of Epoch Pi, an investment banking company serving purpose-based companies. Bill has served on many corporate boards and is an advisor to Evergreen Cooperatives Fund for employee ownership, and is also the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism of Northeast Ohio. So the format that we're going to use for our panel session today ultimately is I'm going to be posing some open questions to our panel, and they'll be giving their insights on that, and that'll lead to, I think, a lot of really interesting discussions. I think this is a very timely topic. I'm sure if you are reading the Wall Street Journal, you'll notice that this is a discussion a lot. What are corporations doing as far as how are they using their business practices, of course, to be successful in their business, but also to respect and take care of the environment, of social justice, and those sorts of things. So very excited to get into this topic. So to make sure we're all on the same page, I do want to start with what seems like a simple question, but probably isn't as simple as we think, which is, what is ESG? So I'll let whoever of the panel wants to tackle that first, go right ahead.
I'm happy to jump in. We have some slides that maybe our moderator will. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And probably the significance of this in the marketplace is that it's a change in focus from shareholders, which have historically been the only constituency that a board of directors was held responsible to attending to, and towards now stakeholders, so customers, employees, governments, the local community, et cetera. And in some realms, this is a change in investment intention towards generating measurable social and environmental impact along with financial returns. So if you go to the next slide. So the foundation of much of the ESG movement has its origins in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that the UN adopted in 2015 to assist the world in sustainable development, tackling many of the major problems from poverty to water and air pollution, et cetera. What's interesting about the Sustainable Development Goals is there's about 169 targets that fall under those 17 goals, and there's some 230 indicators. So an example might be no poverty, and with a target of eliminating poverty by 2030, and an indicator might be the percentage of population in a given geography that lives under the poverty level. The origin of the UN SDGs dates back to the Millennium Development Goals, which were founded, not surprisingly, in 2000. And it's interesting because while the UN SDGs have been overwhelmingly accepted by all of the United Nations member states, the Millennial Goals worked. And the Millennial Goals were 8 goals that were created by government officials from around the world in what was really closed door sessions. And the difference is that the UN sustainability goals were a bottom-up approach. There were some 3 million people that were involved. There were over 300 topics that were discussed and analyzed and boiled into the 17 goals. But these goals are really sort of the fundamentals. So if you go to the next slide. So there are a lot of buzzwords. You know, one of the things with anything new is that we haven't settled on a vernacular. And so you'll hear lots of these terms all talking about this general movement of focusing on stakeholders, not just shareholders. You can go to the next slide. So underpinning a lot of this, in my assessment, is a change in demographics and therefore consumer spending. So while 49% of my generation, the boomers, think social, political, and environmental impact is important to investing, 70% of Gen Xers, 71% of women, and 85% of millennials. So what's interesting is that, and you can put Gen Z in with the millennials, and together millennials and Gen Z are the largest spending cohort in the economy. So if you can go to the next page. So that's a significant element. So in 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is the sort of largest non-governmental voice of business, actually changed the definition or purpose of a corporation, or their stated purpose, to include language that companies need to exist to promote an economy that serves all Americans. That was significant because it was Friedman's voice of the only thing, only purpose of a business is to make profits, and everything else, all social elements fall to government, not-for-profits, etc. So why I think it's that shifting demographic is those 181 CEOs of these large companies. I don't, this is personal opinion, I don't think they earnestly are zealots for the environment, but they all have marketing departments, and those marketing departments probably had a lot to do with them understanding this sea change. If they go to the next slide. So yes, there's forces at work that are helping this evolution. Part of it is regulatory. Governments, Europe and Scandinavia are leading the world, and the US is quite frankly a laggard in its adoption of these concepts. And we talked a little bit about the stakeholder sort of bottom-up approach. So employees, customers, investors are all pushing for this. So these are sort of the forces. You can go to the next slide. And this is just sort of how ESG breaks out. So different categories, if you will. And you can go to the next slide. And I guess to sum it up, this is the last slide. All of this, and there's not uniformity of opinion around this. There's a lot of controversy, and you probably have seen that in articles with, in particular, some of the more conservative politicians trying to ban the use of ESG metrics. States like Texas, which is obviously sees this as an existential threat to their economy of oil and gas. Even Kentucky has come out. Kentucky and Florida have come out with statements prohibiting their investment or their pension funds from using these metrics. So we're in the midst of change. But there is a lot of evidence that there's a good correlation between adherence to ESG and stock performance. So sorry to be so long-winded.
No, thanks, Bill. And Jack and Kristina, anything to add? That was obviously very comprehensive. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that I probably would take it to a I think start at a simpler level, I think, in level set and just sort of identifying. I think a lot of times when I have the conversations about this topic, sometimes it's not even understood what particularly E, S, and G mean to an organization potentially. And so, you know, I think it's important to note that obviously from the environmental perspective, you know, it's understanding and defining the impact that your company has on climate change, and also the impact climate change has on your company. So being able to look at that through that lens, you know, obviously the intent of an ESG program is to operate in a sustainable and socially conscious way. So that's really the lens in which this is being viewed. The social piece is really focusing on the individuals in your organization, your supply chain, your communities you serve, and making sure that their basic needs, their human rights, their safety needs are met. It's like the moral lens of, you know, that multi-tiered approach. And then governance is really, you know, it's like the stepchild of it all. No one really wants to talk about it because it's not fun. There's not a lot going on, but it's necessary. And, you know, the governance aspect is what allows an organization to move forward in the S and the E portions. You know, your assurance, your accountability functions, and that's the ethical lens in a lot of ways. And it ties it all together. And so you can't really have progress in one without all of them, truthfully. And I think that, you know, this is the way that's been helpful for me within our organization to align it, particularly with the products that we have and the communities we serve.
Yeah, from my perspective, having worked at a Fortune 500 company for over 30 years, the way Eaton has looked at ESG is from two perspectives. One, yeah, we all hear about global warming. That's, you know, kind of what is happening. There's scientific evidence for that, so we need to address that. We can see a lot of the social concerns that we have, the inequities between diverse types of populations. And also from a governance standpoint, kind of who calls the shots when it comes to how companies are investing in their communities or not. And is it just more for the profit, for the bottom line, or is it, you know, are we trying to help our employees get better and live higher quality lives? But the second aspect that Eaton also looks at is how can our products that we make help the world be a safer place when it comes to electrical components? We make a lot of components that are, you know, based in the electrical industry. So, you know, we are transitioning to electric vehicles. And so we have a vehicle business and we have an electrical business. And so when we combine them, we are now making components that go into electric vehicles. So we're looking at it from not only how do we reduce our footprint of how much waste we send to landfills, but how can we make products that are smarter and less impactful on the environment, as well as how our employees are treated. And so, Heather, if you can pull up the website, I'd like to show the Eaton website real quickly, and go through 2 or 3 clicks, which can serve as a reference point for anybody on this call, that if you're doing some research in this area, if you want a good reference point that you can relate back to and dig deeper into certain measures, this will kind of show you what at least one of the major companies is doing. And so, Heather, thank you for bringing this up. This is Eaton.com for all of you on the call. And I'm going to ask Heather to just scroll down a little bit so you could see this one area called sustainability. So here's one of the goals, right? Eaton operations are to be carbon neutral is one of our goals. And if you click on that and then just scroll down this one page, you could see, hey, there's a whole sustainability report that we put out every year, which measures the progress on what we're doing. You don't have to click on that now. I just want to scroll down. You could see here's another link to our 20 goals and targets for all of the things. If you scroll down a little further, here's our mission statement. We will want to improve the quality of life for people and the environment. This is Eaton's goal, right? Let's help to improve the quality of life for people and the quality of our environment. And so as you scroll down even a little bit further, you could get our past reports, you could get statements from our chairman. And now here, if you want to get into topic specific about what Eaton's doing, what kind of climate actions are we taking, what positive impact products we have that could be components into our other customers that are also have concerns. We can go into talent management, water use, Cleveland states in Cleveland, and many years ago we had a river that caught fire. And so we're not very proud of that. But what happened since then is now with government assistance, there's regulations that now the water that you put back into a river has to be cleaner than what you took out, so that doesn't repeat itself. So you might say, hey, environmental consciousness had a start many, many years ago. And so now we're just leveraging on that in many other areas. You could look at waste reduction, or how much we measure. We have plants that are committed to zero waste reduction. So anything that we put in the garbage has to be a recyclable element. So our goals, and we measure these in very different ways, is really critical. Now, I will say the last thing on the bottom right is ESG priority topics. And this is the last link I'm going to take you to. So this really just kind of compartmentalizes what are we talking about when we are talking about environmental improvements that we want to make, not only from Eaton's footprint, but our products. How can we help make the water cleaner? Whether you could think about these large vessels that carry goods across the ocean, they oftentimes have ballast systems, and they have to take water from one body of water, and they come across the ocean, and they come into Lake Erie, and then they flush that water. Well, there's filtering systems that we make that help filter out the particles and the zebra mussels and things like that might, contaminate from one water source to another. So that's just an example, but there's another category for social. And, we measure occupational health and safety as part of being on the chairman's staff. Every month we would get a composite score of every plant. We have over 230 plants around the world. Anywhere there was an accident where a worker had a laceration or someone fell and broke their arm, we would get reports at the highest levels to see how are we doing when it comes to employee safety. That's how critical we thought that would be. And then another category is governance. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we have products and solutions that help other companies make life better, safer when it comes to touching electrical outlets and or working with high voltage electricity things, electrical components for e-vehicles, right? You've all heard about Tesla, and all the big car companies now are starting to transition to electric vehicles. So, that's kind of Eaton's viewpoint. Not only are we going to try to do things from our own plant perspective, but what products can we make and invent that help the future of the whole world? So thank you, Ben. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, so that leads in nicely to our next open question. Before we get to that, I should mention, I failed to mention early on that if you do have, if you're an audience member and you have questions, please feel free to put your questions, type those in, submit those, and we'll get to some of those towards the end of our presentation. But our next open question to the panel is, why is ESG valuable to your organization? And Kristina, why don't you start us off with that one?
Yeah, sure. So for American Greetings, it really is our value. AG leads the celebrations industry with product and marketing that represents all of our consumers. Our purpose is to make the world a more thoughtful and caring place. And we really do live that. And so that just overlies with ESG, I think, in every way. So care and respect for the people and the planet, that's what we strive to do, to make a positive social impact, to operate ethically, to ensure long-term environmental sustainability of our operations, in addition to obviously protecting the interests of our stakeholders, customers, and associates. So we are a private company. However, we have strategic business partners who are public, and therefore their reporting obligations do trickle down to us. But also our customer and the consumer expectations, which is why we put out our Connections for Good report, which is our first ESG report published last year. It's really highlighting what we're doing and why we're doing it in a multi-layered view that is ESG. So some of the areas that we focused is thinking about offsetting our world headquarters emissions. We've worked with the World Land Trust, carbon balancing our usage, funding and protecting over 50 acres of threatened habitat in the coastal Guatemalan area. So with that, we were looking not just at what sort of impact could have that could potentially reduce our sustainability lens, but how do we help enrich those regions that need support? And in that area, it supports hundreds of landowners, including local communities, registering for land titles and protecting the threatened coastal forests. American Greetings received a perfect score on the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equity Index as one of the best places to work. And then what I think ties up the way we approach our business and strategically lie in with ESG is it's called the My Road. So it is the My Recorded On-Demand Audio Discharge Card. And so that was created in 2020 with the Cleveland Clinic. So what this did was it provided 4 pre-recorded messages for heart failure patients. So American Greetings manufactures those battery operated cards. So just like you'd open it up and play a birthday card, this card opened up and it focused on providing information critical for the first 30 to 45 days of self-care after a hospital discharge. So the format designed promoted continuous engagement and it encouraged healthy behaviors for long-term self-care. So in 2020, the clinical trials results were presented at the American Heart Association's annual meeting, and it showed significant reductions in patients being readmitted within 30 days of discharge from the hospital. So this debuted in the Cleveland Clinic in September of 2021, and the cards helped guide 10,000 heart patients on their recovery journey. So this is just one way in which AG is looking at how we better serve the communities we serve, individuals, but make the planet truly better, not just for an environmental perspective, but for everyone. And so as sort of, I think, corny as that may seem, that really is the purpose of our organization. It's on the walls for those that have been in our buildings, but it's to make the world a more caring and thoughtful place. And that's why when I say that, this aligns with our values, and it not only drives our value, but it is representative of our value. It's true. So.
Thanks, Kristina. Bill, we'll go to you. Why is ESG valuable to your organization?
Yeah, it's a little different for us. I mean, I think American Greetings and Eaton are exemplars in this space. Two big companies that have pivoted when most of the world is still trying to figure it out. So we're an investment bank. So in short, we help companies raise capital, find merger partners, find liquidity for shareholders, et cetera. And what's unique about us is we're focused exclusively on this community of companies that are intentional about creating social value as well as market-based financial returns. So a lot of our customers, privately held companies, we deal with smaller companies valued anywhere from 10 to maybe 200 million in value. So far below AG and Eaton. But those companies have unique concerns. If they're going to sell the company, they want to make sure that there's a shared value around their mission, around their purpose. And so we kind of incorporate values alignment, culture alignment into the typical M&A process, which is unique, so that our clients can find like-minded buyers, like-minded investors, et cetera. So that's sort of the lens through which we see all this.
Great. And Jack, I know you kind of touched on this question already in your previous comments, but is there anything you wanted to add about why ESG is valuable to Eaton?
Yeah, I think it more or less, it's the right thing to do, right? We need to leave this earth in a state that's, I won't say better than we inherited it, but certainly we don't want to leave it as a disaster for those that are coming after us. I think that's just kind of common sense. And then also from a social perspective, it's been pretty obvious that diversity needs to be given fair share, right? There's a lot of good ideas that a lot of people have, and if you just clog up the pipe from hearing those ideas, then I think you're missing the boat. And, another company might excel a little faster in certain areas than we would. So we're very cognizant of diversity aspects and helping the communities where we work. We would go out of our way to really help areas that were in need, and to help fortify things and bring awareness to social injustice and that. So yeah, I think there's just, how do you feel? How does your conscience feel about the world and global warming, and what are we doing about it, right? We got to do something about this stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where it really hits home.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so our next open question to the panel is, what is currently driving the ESG movement? And I feel like in our conversation so far, and your comments so far, it's been more talk about the environment side of things than the S and the G, right? And obviously we have to break this up a little bit. So it's because we've got different categories. There's some overlap, as Kristina so eloquently put it early on. But I was curious what your thoughts are on what is currently driving the ESG movement from the social aspect, particularly.
Well, I'll start out on that one, and I think one of the easiest things to measure is accidents in the workplace, right? When the economic revolution started, years ago, and we got into the assembly line mentality, it kind of just, if a person got hurt on the job, that was just kind of came with the territory. And even to this day, depending upon which country you're talking about, we're much more conscious about employee safety here in the US. And then if you look at Turkey, we have some plants that are in Turkey. They weren't so much conscious. And so we started to deploy, methods of measuring, right? We had to record every accident and what occurred and why and what is going to be done to help prevent that. So, from a social standpoint, that's really kind of one easy area to start measuring. Another one is employee, pay and benefits, right? We're trying to make sure that, we're not just using child labor, forget that. But, when we operate in over 85 countries, not every country has laws that we're really kind of used to in the US, right? So we have to audit for, child labor. It doesn't sound like we'd have to do that, but, when you're not here in this country, there's other countries that, don't really subscribe to maybe all of the ways and means that we're running businesses here. So we also look at inclusion and diversity, as I mentioned, and then we kind of, since we're buyers of raw materials and components that go into our products, we're starting to ask our suppliers, hey, are you using child labor? Because if you are, guess what? We may not want to be buying our purchasing your goods to go into our products. So we can then start to influence our supplier base and to kind of how they're handling their social pieces, their environmental pieces, et cetera. So, that's where I think we begin to have some leverage over the supply base.
Thanks, Jack. What about you, Bill? What do you think as far as the social aspect of ESG? What's currently driving the ESG movement in the social aspect?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about when I was in school 100 years ago, and environmental book or economics books had a chapter, probably the smallest chapter, called externalities. And it came from a neo-economic model of maximizing profit at all costs. Oh, and by the way, there are occasionally externalities, like we pollute water systems, the air, abuse, women and children. And we've corrected many of those things over time in the last couple hundred years. But I think there's just been a growing awareness that our system of capitalism was a tremendous vehicle, and it allocated capital, and it helped us find what the right price for various inputs should be, et cetera. It's a wonderful system in my view. But if it isn't coupled with values, it can go astray. And so if our values are to hell with everybody but me, I'm just going to make as much money as I can, then we pollute the air and the water, and we don't respect our fellow humans or the planet. And I just think there's been a growing shift. It's over time, being the father of a couple of millennials, they just came out of the womb seeing the world differently. These are all things that are to them, they can't understand why you wouldn't value these things. So I think it's that, and I think it's been catalyzed by a couple of economic shocks, because economic shocks give us a chance to pause and say, why are we doing what we're doing? So we saw it in 2008 and 2009, which were pivotal times for the growth of impact investing. The B Corp movement, conscious capitalism, they all came out of generally that period of time. The Rockefeller Foundation created the Global Impact Investing Network with a seed investment of $35 million in 2007. So that was another shock. And of course, the pandemic, which made it acutely obvious that different socioeconomic cohorts fared better or a lot worse. And so I think that was further sort of compelled these things. Now, obviously, Eaton and HE were well on the path of all this before then, but I think for the general public, those are some of the things that have shifted it.
Thanks, Bill. What are your thoughts, Kristina?
I think echoing that, certainly louder calls to action, causing you to look deeper into your organizations. I think, more so than just the code of conduct requirements with social media and 24-hour news cycles, we can see farther and deeper than we've ever seen before. We see the good, we see the bad. And so that visibility can call to individuals or organizations to lead with a lot more empathy on issues and events that they might not have access to otherwise. The social aspects don't just consider the basic needs or food and shelter, but the human rights and safety. So focusing on helping people so that they have the resources in turn to help the planet, has really become really visible, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think also emphasizing this is some of the regulatory plays that are highlighting this most recently is the UFLPA, which is a new requirement focused on forced labor, prohibiting forced labor out of a region in China. And the US government has come very strongly in oversight on that area. And there's tremendous due diligence requirements on supply chains and organizations. And that's just one area where we're seeing that the values are aligning and the enforcement is there. And I think that that's become more of the expectation, certainly of this generation. It's that, companies and products should do no harm, and it's of the obligation of the organizations to assure that. And I think that it's that to me is what's been like the most significant switch for the social aspect.
Thanks. And it sounds like, yeah, based on your answers, it all kind of intertwines, right? Like you talked about, like there are definitely environmental injustices, social injustices that are driving this movement as well. So the next question, and Bill, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, so I'll start with you on this. What are your thoughts about national pressures related to ESG versus global pressures? Obviously, things are happening differently a little bit in the US versus what's happening in other places in the world. So what are your thoughts about like the differing pressures between the US and the rest of the world?
Yes. So as a Clevelander, we think Eaton is a Cleveland company, but they're incorporated in Ireland and they're a global company. They have plants probably on every continent except Antarctica. And so they have to comport to a global marketplace and a global regulatory scheme. And so, and the reality is that Northern Europe is just way ahead of us on all of this in the US. They're 20 years, in my assessment, ahead of us. And so, while we are lagging in the US, this summer, the SEC put forth some climate disclosure requirements for publicly reporting companies, which has gotten huge pushback. I think we're still waiting for the final draft. I don't think it's been released. But that's going to be a game changer. And a lot of the commentary seems to ignore the fact that Europe did this 18 months ago, so, or before. So, you know, companies like Eaton, they're playing on a world stage, and as I'm sure American Greetings too. And so I don't know why we're lagging. That would be good for someone from Cleveland State's sociology department, but we are, in my assessment.
Right. Other thoughts, Jack or Kristina?
I think that it's not, you know, noting that we're behind, certainly, I think it's not that different than how the various countries approach regulation generally. Europe follows the precautionary principle, just very generally, right? That if even if there's a lack of evidence pertaining to a threat or hazard, it doesn't mean that regulators should not intervene. And that it's really the burden of proof falls on the producers to show that a process, a product, an operation is safe. So essentially lack of certainty, not reason enough to delay any sort of protective measures. And that's how, you know, food and drug is managed, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, they're managed in that way as well between Europe, which is different than the way the US approaches it. And I think that this sort of falls in line with that as well. In addition to the fact that it's highly politicized in the US. So I sort of make the joke that the US is finally at the point now, I think most Americans understand that climate change isn't just a subplot to Superman, right? It's something real. And now that we're starting to pick up on that and it's becoming more front of mind, you are seeing a push and sort of that failure to act on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on mine, and it really does. It's sort of a lack of any sort of historical effort is why we're in the situation we are now, and Europe just saw the light sooner and started acting.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe throw a couple cents in on this topic as well. Yeah, Europe is more highly regulated than the US is, but I think the US is more regulated than I'll just say some other countries on Asia, the Asia continent, right? And so I think while we're lagging, we're still not last. Okay, so I don't want you to walk away thinking we're dragging everybody down on the curve, so to speak. But yeah, we do need to look at this as more of a global space, and just from an air pollution standpoint, if you go to Beijing, right, you're going to be wearing a mask, not from a COVID perspective, but because of the car and the smog. And we finally have catalytic converters on our cars. Well, they don't, right? But in Europe, they have like great subway systems, great train systems to move people around, and we don't. We're mostly carbon producing cars, right? So I think we have to look at the world holistically and recognize that there are countries that are leading the way, but we need to be fast followers and adopt those that we can. And I think it also has to be economically feasible, right? You just can't say, okay, we're not gonna drill for oil anymore and we're all gonna be electric. We can't just flip a switch and tomorrow we're gonna all be driving electric vehicles. It's gonna take a transition, but it has to be measured and thought through. And some are gonna go faster than others, but I still think We just need to keep the whole ESG mindset as kind of like the playing field that we have to keep after and don't forget it.
And that leads very well actually into our next question, which obviously we've heard some great things about what Eaton's doing in ESG, what American Greetings is doing, what Bill's company is helping their clients do. But there is the practicality issue, right? Is we want to be able to, as businesses, use sustainable practices, make sure we're being equitable in our hiring practices, all that sort of thing. But the question then becomes, how can companies tackle the difficulties of making the transition to more sustainable practices? And how can they make that work for them in a business sense and in the practical sense? So Kristina, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I think, for us, it's interesting because we're relatively, certainly compared to Eaton, new in this area within the past 5 years, and we've made a lot of headway on it. But I recall the meetings to just onboard the conversations generally about sustainability and what we do and how we would approach that, and just the cross-functional conversations and inputs that went in around that, and those sort of hurdles to hop over just to get the conversation going. And I think looking back on it, the way in which we made and were able to start making the momentum we were was going after the low-hanging fruit. And I know that a lot of companies have already sort of gone in that direction. A lot of the LED lights are transitioned out, and code of conducts are in place and things along that line. But I think particularly talking about sustainability and environmentally responsible practices, if you kind of go after those low-hanging fruits, those ones that can actually drive some savings, and you prop those up and you kind of use those savings to tackle the bigger investments. Once you see some savings in one area and that sort of snowball, it gets a lot easier to have those conversations, right? It's not just about an outlay of cash to make some changes. It's about that there is actual savings possible, and you can see the externalities across the business and where that can play out and how that can impact. And I think it's just finding the common denominator against the business, sort of language that everyone's going to speak and understand, to start the ball rolling. And then you can layer on perhaps a little bit more complicated projects or subject matters. That's where we started. And then shortly thereafter, we rolled out our DE&I program. We now, 2 years ago, brought on a director of that area. So I think it's, finding that sort of launch pad to then start building your strategy beyond just compliance then, and being able to build it into your long-term business plans.
Great. Thanks, Kristina.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to leverage off of that. You have to make it economically feasible to so long as you have your goals to say, okay, we're going to reduce air pollution and we have all these plants. Well, some of those plants are going to need capital investments to, let's just call them scrubbers, to scrub the dirty stuff that's going into the air, right? So you are going to have to make an investment. Well, when you start to look at this investment, like any other investment, you're going to have to start to say, okay, we're going to plan to do this investment in 4 years. Well, we better start accruing, right? We better start accruing monies to get ourselves halfway to what that investment is. Then we'll borrow the rest of the money. So we're going to look at paying for this over 10 years, right? Because you can't just swallow it all in 1 year. So you just have to think about these investments it just like you would any other investment, for whether it's going to make something less cost effective. You're going to put in some other things that help run your plant more efficiently. You just have to look at these environmental investments the same way, or whether they're social investments, right? we have several plants in Mexico now, and when we do acquisitions, we see big disparities in their occupational health and safety aspects, and so we try to raise the bar where we can, or what we have control over. And like I said, if we need to make other investments, we have to look at it more of a long-term plan so that we can get there, right? We just have to look at it, and that's how we have to solve the economic viability of these things.
Great. Yeah, any additional thoughts? Trying to keep it to a minute, Bill. I want to get to some of these questions from the audience.
Yes, I think unfortunately we live in a time with where the 30-second soundbite rules, and this is an incredibly complicated, intermingled issue. And the impression many people have is that these solutions are out there and these companies just won't put them in place. We don't have answers. We do not know how to make cement. We do not know how to make steel in a way that is not hugely carbon intensive. That's period. So we've got a long way to go. It's difficult. Bravo to the companies that are trying.
All right, so yeah, I wanted to get to some of these audience questions. So the first one kind of talks about the inequities between low income versus wealthier neighborhoods, and how there have been some potential environmental injustices done to maybe make that inequitable to low income neighborhoods. And so what ultimately is being done about that, the inequities between how their environmental injustices that potentially affects our different demographics differently?
That's a good one. I think we need somebody from the mayor's office.
Yeah. Well, I know firsthand that Eaton does go into the various communities in the Cleveland area, right? And we will send busloads of our employees to help do projects, right, to help neighborhoods fix things up, right? Obviously that doesn't solve what caused degradations, but at least it's an attempt to help right the ship, whether it's helping the poor in ways, donating funds or goods, and just being more community conscious in a way, as well as we have applications for our local jobs, and we discriminate. So if we can help out landing jobs for people in need, then we give them a fair shake.
There is a growing awareness that we need to solve these problems, and there is money that is being organized to explore lots of different aspects of this. But it's slow, it's complicated. Many of these communities don't have a job base that spawns everything: grocery stores, all kinds of health services, etc. But companies are beginning to recognize that they need to invest in these communities in order to meet some of their larger DEI goals. So I don't know. It's a tough problem, and it's a real problem. I don't have answers.
Yeah. Another example we used was when our PCs would become 2 years old, we would turn them in and get new ones. Well, we took our old ones and we started to provide them to the students in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District that couldn't go to school because of COVID, but they couldn't log in to do remote learning because they didn't have the PCs. So we started to address, grassroots problems where we can. And that's just another example of keeping your eyes open on what companies can do.
Yeah, some good examples, but obviously, yeah, a tough problem that deserves a lot more attention. Another audience question is clearly ESG is a growing field as companies pay more attention to these issues. So what areas of study are leading people to work in this field, or what areas of study should our students be going into to get into this field?
Well, Cleveland State has a sustainability program, I believe. I'm not an expert in this, so we should really let Kristina talk to it. But I have a niece who's graduating with a couple of science degrees that don't have the word sustainability in it, but she's looking for sustainability jobs. And I think there are lots of those jobs. If you want to be an accountant, great. The accounting profession is learning how to implement all of these metrics. You can get certified from the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. So probably the answer is lots of areas. I'll defer to the others.
I'll just throw in that I think internal audit or external audit are also venues with which you're going to touch upon validating how each of the operations measure their responsible areas. And so it gives you a broader viewpoint of the entire program of a company. So I'll just throw my head on that. Kristina, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, and we've gone through this experience. We had an internship over the summer focused on this. So very top of mind, looking at particularly what sort of background we're looking for. For us and from my approach, so, I come from a compliance background. I studied economics, but I think that it's less of the actual knowledge perhaps on environmental matters and more on the willingness to problem solve and the ability to research and analyze data and the ability to consistently approach problems that can really wear you down. I think that we've seen a lot of individuals that have an interest and might not have the background focused in sustainability necessarily, and I don't think that that's detract from their ability to, because I think at a root it's the willingness to problem solve and then having the skill sets, as Jack and Bill mentioned. So audit, the accounting, the ability to review and analyze data. But I do also think that there is a strong case for supply chain. As we're going to be moving into scope 3 and it's become so top of mind, you're going to have individuals that understand how that operation works and the flow through from both the upstream and downstream channels. And I think that that's a great one. Yeah,
So obviously, yeah, having multiple skill sets is important here, as we know in the world of business, right? But thank you for your thoughts. So unfortunately, we're out of time, so don't have time for any additional questions. But I did want to ask just a quick question to each of you as we finish this up. What is your one big takeaway for the audience today? And do you have any go-to resource that you would point them to for more information on this topic?
This
yeah,
one,
go ahead, Jack.
I'll just say to keep an open mind and keep listening to the news about what's going on in the areas of E, S, and G, right? And then I'll just say use the Eaton website as a resource, like I said, as a reference point for you.
Great. Bill?
Well, I think the water's fine, jump in. There's lots of opportunity, especially for those younger. This is going to be a huge field during your career, and there will be lots of opportunities if you're interested in finance and accounting. There are aspects of both of those. There's this whole field of impact investing we didn't talk a lot about, but all of the big private equity funds are creating impact funds, and it's happening at all levels. So, and I would say if you're really interested in how this is impacting finance, there's a daily news media outlet called Impact Alpha, which is a good source.
Great. And Kristina.
I would just say that, success in this area doesn't mean being the first to market with an ESG report or setting a goal. It's about continuing to improve on what exists and doing better every day. So it's just a small incremental changes, and the compound effect of those is what's going to make the needle move. And then I use, and it's sort of my go-to, it's called Industry Intelligence. So it's a sustainability market report, and it curates and catalogs anything and everything that's been posted online or throughout any sort of media, and you can curate it to what your business interests are, topic matters. And so it's a great way to just get a bird's eye view of what's going on.
Well, thank you so much, Kristina, Jack, and Bill, for taking the time to speak with us today and give us your insights. We really appreciate that. And thank you to our audience for attending. We do have another Cornerstone Speaker Series coming up next month, Wednesday, November 16th, on the topic of digital marketing. That'll be led and moderated by Dr. Sabrina Liu from our marketing department here at CSU, and we hope you join us for that event as well. But thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.